Let's talk about future-proofing organizations and growth. I know that these sound like buzzwords, and they are, unless we can back it up. So let's have a look at it. Have you ever had this feeling when you were talking to someone? When you were talking to a person and you thought, whoa, this person has no common sense at all. They just don't get you. Unless you can choose who you interact with, then probably you face this challenge every single day. But have you ever thought about the fact that probably they felt the same way about you, but for a different reason? So the level of pain and frustration were the same, but the reason was different. The problem is that a lot of good ideas sound really good until you dig deeper. So for example, this African proverb is really popular. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it does sound good, but is it really true? It is, if you're in the right team. If you're not, to be honest, it's better to be alone. So it's not automatic. We have to make it work. There's nothing better than a really good team. But turning a visibly diverse group into a high-performing team is not easy, even if you have the blueprint. This update had more than 1 million views on LinkedIn in 2 weeks' time because it hit a nerve. A lot of people resonated with the message. A lot of people felt like this. You employ a lot of smart people. They are all in a team. We hope to create synergy by combining their skills, but this is not what happens in real life because a huge percentage of the knowledge and potential is lost because people don't speak up. Of course, we can jump to the conclusion that those introverted people, they just don't talk, create some space for you. No, there's much more to it. And this webinar is about those insights because there are different reasons. What if you solve a problem that is not a real issue? And a lot of people are really good at that. But how do you know what the root cause of the problem is? Let's look into it. We all have a goal. We all have a purpose. We want to grow. That is objective. We are growing or we are declining. Plateau is a myth. Often we just don't see the difference. But if you want to plan a journey, you have to know where you start. If the starting point is not correct, it's really, really difficult to plan the journey accurately. Where do we start? So let's see. 80% of employees think that the managers are not needed. And that is a really big problem because 70% of engagement depends on the leaders. To make it a bit more interesting, 71% of employees feel that the leaders are not ready to lead the organization into the future. So why would I follow anyone if I don't trust them, if they have no idea where they are going? At the same time, we don't know what the future holds. It's good to have plans, but like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. After that, it gets a bit more difficult. But we know the trends that shape the future. So for example, according to their research, in 2030, the jobs, 85% of the jobs that will exist haven't been invented yet. The future is not like it used to be, as an old graffiti says. And by 2030, there's going to be a global talent shortage of 85 million people. So we talk about overpopulation, but we are losing people, and that's going to be an issue. So how can we keep the best people, and how can we attract the right talent? That's the real question. So today, we're going to talk about the most important ingredient of growth. Once we find out what that is, we talk about the 2 barriers to making it happen. And then we talk about the 3 invisible forces that make or break a team. And we will find out how they influence the 4 stages of growth, or technically decline. So what we should be teaching leaders now to prepare for the future? This is the question that Jacob Morgan asked 140 top CEOs and 14,000 employees. It's really practical. He analyzed the answers and then he published The Future Leader. He came up with 4 mindsets and 5 skills. I changed the names a little bit to make them more descriptive because like Jedi and Chef didn't make a lot of sense, but that's based on his definitions. In terms of the mindsets, that was growth mindset, teamwork, inclusion, and global mindset. In terms of the skills, coaching, innovation, communication, self-awareness, and technology. As you can see, 8 out of the 9 skills and mindsets are directly linked to how much you understand yourself and others. It's that important. People skills are not optional. They are not soft. People skills are business skills. If you don't understand yourself and others, you're not going to be in business for too long. But because it's often invisible, people don't understand it. It sounds too fluffy. It's not. Nowadays, information is available, but that's not going to replace leaders and good teamwork. So if we know that this is what we need, people skills, how come we cannot tap into that potential? One of the main barriers is common sense. This is something that we all demand, and we think that when people have common sense, they are smart. But common sense is technically based on the golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Common sense is when people think like you. We love that. The brain loves it. It's predictable. It's familiar. What's not to like? We can save energy. But if you try to lead and serve people based on what you need and what you like, it's going to backfire quite a lot. According to research, 60 to 80% of all problems in a company happen for 3 reasons: clash of values, clash of personalities, and poor leadership. And all 3 of them stem from the same source: the lack of understanding of why people think and behave differently. So we need to learn about that. It's not automatic. And because we rely on good intention and common sense, it creates a mindset gap, which is really expensive and it's often damaging. For example, 86% of leaders see themselves as inspiring, really confident people. But if you look at the McKinsey report, 82% of employees think they're not. And we are not saying that they are not good leaders or they are bad people. That's not true. They just don't know about this topic. 80% of CEOs believe that their customer service is outstanding. Of course. Do you think it's true? Well, if you look at the data from Salesforce, only 8% of customers agree with them. That's not a lot. But according to them, 91% of people are not going to say anything. They just go somewhere else where they feel valued and understood. The remaining 9% is going to get really vocal on social media because angry people are really talkative. $46 billion are globally invested in leadership training every single year. Is it a good business? Yes, for the training companies. Otherwise, it improves productivity by 2% only. Just like during a divorce, the only guaranteed winner is the lawyer. The training companies always have something to sell, but that's not necessarily what you need. And this is what we are going to talk about today. Because that leads us to the second barrier: outdated and incomplete solutions. There are 5 emerging forces shaping the world right now, rapidly. First, the nature of the world. Human knowledge doubles every 12 hours. Information is being developed and it's accessible. This is insane. It's a lot. How can you keep up with it? That's how we need to specialize and learn how to work with other people. But also, we have to collaborate. It's much more service-based. We can work from anywhere. It's hybrid, it's online, we can travel. And also more diverse and also inclusive. But let's be honest, it also changed because your employees and your clients have plenty of options. When people don't feel valued and understood, they go somewhere else. And maybe they don't tell you, the numbers will. So we have 2 epic imperatives right now. Win the workplace, win the market. And that is all about people. How much you understand yourself and how much you understand others, especially the ones who think and behave differently. It's easy to ignore something we cannot see, like people skills, like mindset, like culture. But as soon as you make it visible, it becomes real. And that is the secret. The problem is that according to the Trust and Inspire, Stephen Covey's book, the most popular management models that we are using today were created by people who were born just after the American Civil War in the 19th century. That's kind of insane. The world completely changed, but not the solutions that we are using. Many of them were developed in the 50s and 60s, and when our great-grandparents answered the questions, there was no internet, no EU, no cheap flights. That time, less than 17% of the value was created by humans, and they were seen as a cost to maintain. And now that number is more than 90%, but we are using the same tools and techniques. Of course, we are not getting the results they are hoping for and paying for. And that's a problem. New challenges require new solutions. It's like trying to fix a smart TV with tools designed for black and white ones. Yes, you can try harder, but that's not going to fix it. It's different. And even if you look at the employee engagement trend, for the last 20 years in the US, companies spend a lot of money on the same solutions, but the numbers are not really improving. That's the definition of insanity. But because we are busy every day, we don't zoom out and check if whatever we invest in, is it working or is it not? We are just running on autopilot. That's what we used last year. It was entertaining. It's too much hassle to change. Is it? But do you know where it leads to? Because the numbers are not really improving. And unfortunately, I was part of the statistics and I made a lot of mistakes as well. So if you look at this good-looking guy in the uniform, that's me. I grew up in Hungary in a small village. And when somebody mentioned the word culture, I thought, well, we have to go to the theater again. And I didn't want to. That's what it meant to me. And because I had no idea what to do, I studied Italian linguistics and I got a master's, but I don't speak Italian anymore. As soon as I finished, I went to the UK for a summer, and that was 20 years ago. My dissertation there was about the implications in Eastern and Western European joint ventures. So it was much more practical. And my research was about comparing the Hungarian managers with the Western Europeans. And the data showed that the gap between the two generations was much bigger than the gap between the new generation and the Western Europeans, which technically contradicted everything that we learned about, what all the academics claimed. Culture is country-specific and stable. And I thought, that's not true. Look at the numbers. But you cannot question the big boys. They've been around for 40, 50 years. That's not polite. I got a good grade, and then I forgot about it. I started my own company, which was a restaurant booking site. You book a table, we get the money. That's the business model, but the concept was much more exciting than that. We started with 35 restaurants here in Brighton, and then in 1 year we had 5,500 all over the UK, and it turned into the fastest growing restaurant listing, and it also turned into a joint venture with a software company. So on paper, everything made sense. We were getting the results, but I couldn't work with the other CEO. He was French. I'm not saying that was the problem. It definitely didn't help. And we had to get out of the business. We sold the shares. It is still online. And this is when I started my research, because I didn't understand how come that was the exact topic of my dissertation. The department where I studied is #1 in the world in its category. I had years of experience. How come I couldn't put that theory into practice? It didn't make sense. So I got certified in a lot of different things, and I wanted to work with the people who created the intercultural field, the psychometric field, and the leadership development field. And my idea or assumption was that if all of these models are or were correct, there must be a huge overlapping part. And that's what I'm interested in. The structure beneath the surface, the blueprint of why people think and behave differently. And it turned out there is one. And also it turned out that lots of people had the same problem. And this webinar is about the insights. It's not about telling you what to think. It's about sharing the mistakes I made, the successes we had, so you can learn from those. You can ask better questions, so you can make better decisions. That's all. And it's not just a good idea. We have more than 200 licensed partners in 46 countries. We work with Fortune 500 companies, universities, national governments. And this one sentence sums up everything that we do. Creating a visibly diverse group is relatively easy, but turning it into a high-performing team is challenging. There's a huge difference between them. And a lot of clients don't know that. So we can deep dive into it. But before we do that, I would like to ask you a question. Do you feel that you're a statistically average, normal individual of the country where you grew up? So I'm going to launch a poll, and you can just click on yes. I'm like a fish in water. No, but I know how to act like one. So 64% of the people said, no, I'm not, but I know how to act like one. 64. So we are not average, at least not most of us. And that's interesting. For example, in the 1950s, the American Air Force had a big problem. The pilots didn't perform. They had lots of accidents, and they didn't know why. Luckily, they had some scientists. And it turned out at first that the problem was that they designed the perfect cockpit for the average pilot in the 1920s. And because in the 1950s, they were bigger, obviously, we need to design the perfect cockpit for the average pilot in the 1950s. So they invited more than 4,000 pilots. They measured them on a lot of different dimensions. Ultimately, they chose 10. And then they created the perfect cockpit. And the performance did not improve at all. And they didn't understand why. But there is something to it, because numbers can lie, especially when it comes to averages. So they expected most of the people to fall within this 30% average. Do you know how many people were there? 0, not one single pilot. And then even when they reduced it to 3 dimensions, it was less than 5% of the pilots who were within that range. So there is no statistically average person. Often numbers look scientific, but how practical they are, that's a completely different story. And when it comes to culture, that's exactly the problem. When you mention that word, most people think about this, the 5 do's and don'ts in different countries, statistically average values and beliefs. Yes, it's important. If you move to a country, you have to learn about what people are used to. That is true. But culture is not who you are, it's what you are used to. So according to research, more than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them. And when they compared 17 different cultural groups, it turned out that the bottom 3, as they said, the poorest container of culture, the country of origin, gender, and generation. Meaning that based on these categories, you cannot predict an individual's values and beliefs. That has nothing to do with science, nothing. And if you go deeper, you find different personality types with completely opposing preferences. And now it's getting much more complicated, the visible layer of diversity. So the point is that you cannot create a high-performing team based on passports. That has nothing to do with science. And for example, any researches or any numbers I mentioned today, if you need the original research, I can send you the exact link. I'm not going to say anything because it sounds good. So this is based on up-to-date research. The more you know, the better decision you can make. So country-specific approach is important when you move to a country. And when it comes to high-performing teams, as you can see, even here, 64% of the people are not statistically average. So why would we assume that others are? That doesn't make sense. So this is fake news. So the first invisible force is cognitive diversity, the immune system of teams. This is the difficult one, the invisible layer. But also, this is the only layer that has proven benefit in terms of performance, the difficult one. So imagine that you have a complex issue and you have a fantastic leader called Tom, and Tom knows this stuff and he's employing really smart people. Fantastic. But he doesn't know about homophilic diversity. And even though it sounds like a disease, it just means that we like people who are similar to us. We like just people who have common sense, people who think like us. And this is how we can end up. So a team can be individually really, really smart, but collectively blind. And it's not just a theory. This is one of our case studies. 10 senior leaders from 8 different countries. On the surface, really diverse. But cognitive diversity, 22%. So if you look at the sliding scales, there's a range of perspectives, approaches to problems and opportunities, then only 22% is covered. Look, all the 10 people are within this range. That's way too similar. But also it makes sense. Why would you employ somebody who annoys you? Somebody who disagrees with you? You don't need that hassle in your life. And this is how we end up. So if you imagine that you have a problem or opportunity here in the middle, and everybody is standing here, 22%, and they read about this, diversity is good for the business. They all agree, so it must be true. No, it's not, because they have a huge blind spot. Since the year 2000, more than 50% of Fortune 500 companies disappeared. Size is not a guarantee for anything. It's about seeing the same situation from different perspectives so you can make better decisions. And then you can choose to respond instead of just reacting. And that is the definition of uncommon mindset. That was another case study. One leader and 4 new employees. And they were really proud of the diversity, at least the visible one. But when we looked at the cognitive layer, they were not that different, 42%. But the interesting thing is when we compared the leader with the group average, it turned out that he managed to attract people like himself from all over the world. Of course, they hit it off. And this is not unique. We have plenty of case studies like this. A bunch of different looking people who think in very similar ways. There was another case study. A big German company employed a lot of Brazilian engineers, and we had to create a high-performing teams. So, of course, we start with the Brazilian and German approach. Very different. We can widen the gap. But when we looked at the results, it turned out that the Brazilian engineers were much more German inside than most Germans. And that was like a psychological permission for them, that that is the right environment. And of course, they have to learn how to buy a bus ticket, yes. But on a cognitive level, they found the right environment in terms of country and even profession. They left Brazil because it was too messy for them. So we could highlight the statistically average national differences that don't apply on individual level to widen the gap, or we can build a common ground based on data. So we can learn how to make the most of our differences. We need to measure what matters instead of guessing. You cannot build a high-performing team based on stereotypes. That has nothing to do with up-to-date science. Another comforting lie. Men and women are so different as if they're from a different planet. So it's not your fault that you don't understand your partner. Genius marketing trick. So we did Uncommon Mindset Bootcamp 2 years ago. We did 10 of those. And we put all the women and men in one group, and we compared them as groups. It turned out they were not that different. Within the same group, we divided them into millennials and baby boomers. Again, it wasn't a huge difference. Often the expectations are big, and we see what we expect to see. That's human nature. Going back to our complex issue, Tom is still the boss. Now he knows about homophilic diversity, so he's employing smart people who think and behave differently. Are we done yet? Is it good for the business? Not necessarily, because that is just the potential for success or disaster. It depends on how much you understand yourself and others. It's not automatic. How do we make it work? And how much potential is lost? That's the real question. But what if Tom is not a good boss? He's way too dominant, and whatever Tom says goes. So people quickly learn, just don't argue, don't bring up any ideas, just don't. So they learn how to conform to the norms. And that's how you lose the power of diversity. And probably these people are going to burn out really quickly. That's not good for the business. There was a company in the US called the Three Circle Partners. They wanted to understand how much potential is lost in the team. So they gave an individual assessment to each member of the team. They scored them individually, and then they had to submit one collectively. So they had to agree on the answers. What you see here, the blue number, this is the team result. And the green one is the best possible individual score. So you can see there's a huge gap. So they had the right answer. It just didn't make it to the collective one. They repeated it hundreds of times. And the average gap was 79%. That's how much potential is lost in a team. We all belong to 15 or 20 culture groups at the same time. So even if you talk to someone in your own family, what are the chances that they belong to the same 15 or 20 culture groups like you? It's pretty much zero. Every single dialogue is a cross-cultural conversation. Every single team is multicultural, even if it's not international. And this is the result of that. This is a really positive approach. You're not telling people that they are not good enough. You're telling them the exact opposite. This is all money and potential left on the table. And you can help them unlock it by giving them the blueprint of why people think and behave differently. What if we could improve it just by 10%? What would that mean to you and your team? Often the highest level of growth is when you stop wasting your potential. Most of the opportunities, time and energy are lost for two reasons. Friction with people who think and behave differently, and friction with ourselves, self-sabotage. So we have to address both. When you take an assessment, you learn about your preference. Of course, your behavior depends on the context, but your preferences are really stable. And statistically, most people have 5 to 10% flexibility. So that's our comfort zone. The brain was not designed to make you happy. It's designed to keep you safe and efficient. So let's stay in the comfort zone. So if you look at the sliding scale as a range of communication styles or behavioral styles, and you are in that situation on the other side, then it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to be draining. So maybe you don't have enough energy left to focus on the task, or you just react instead of responding. So what can we do? Can we change your preference? Of course we can, but there's nothing wrong with anyone. That's not the point. What we want instead is to expand the comfort zone. So it's you, but an upgraded version. Because if something is rigid, it breaks. So we don't have to level up because we are not good enough. No, it's because it's the real safety. But there's also something else. That's one thing that you learn about your own preference. But even a company has a corporate comfort zone. You might call it corporate culture, because that is the behavior that is rewarded and punished. You can push the boundaries, maybe it's accepted, maybe it's tolerated, and the rest is punished. So here's the real question. How big is the mindset gap between you, what's natural to you, and what is normal around you? How much do you have to pretend in order to be accepted? That's the real question. The more you have to flex, the more draining it is. And often we don't even know why. This could be your own family, gender, generation, country, company, any of the 15 or 20 culture groups you need to confront them. Everything matters. This mindset gap, everything is relative. That's why we have to measure it. It's not about the absolute scores. Everything is compared to you. The second invisible force, psychological safety. A lot of people talk about it. They know that it's important. But when you ask them, how do you measure it so you can intentionally and precisely address the root causes? Then often there is silence. Sometimes there's much more passion than science or practicality. And that's holding us back. We know that psychological safety is the #1 trait of high-performing teams. This is what Google came up with. They wanted to understand the secret of the high-performing teams. The first assumption was, we don't need leaders. Bad idea. You need leaders, but you need good ones. And that's what they came up with. Psychological safety is not optional. We know that if you score high on it, you make money. If you score low, you are in trouble. That's the issue with that. But talking about growth mindset on its own is not enough. You need psychological safety. Growth mindset without psychological safety is like trying to swim without water. You can think about it, but that's not the right environment. This is something that you can measure and improve. Growth mindset is a mixed bag. Even according to Carol Dweck, we are all a mixture of fixed and growth mindset. And also it depends on the topic. So if you cannot measure something, how can you improve it? You feel it, it's subjective, but growth is not. Growth is objective. That leads us to the third invisible force, the desire to learn, contribute, and get things done, which is the motivation. Because we are not a family. A family is psychologically safe. But you are not putting your kids on furlough if they are lazy. A business is a high-performing team. You need psychological safety and motivation. That's where the magic happens. But what is that exactly? How can you motivate people? Well, you cannot. People can motivate themselves. But if you know what drives them, you can create that motivating environment around them. There are a lot of different approaches, but this is what I found the best so far. And that was created by Daniel Pink. So he talks about the evolution of motivation. Motivation 1.0 was really primal. survive and make babies. That's it. And that was enough for long. But then we had to learn how to interact with other people. Then we had to upgrade it to motivation 2.0. The pain and pleasure principle, the carrot and the stick, the extrinsic motivators. The problem is we can get used to everything. So you have to punish and reward people more and more to get the same results. And also when it comes to creativity and strategy, it backfires. It doesn't work. So we have to upgrade it to motivation 3.0. These are the intrinsic ones coming from inside. You do it for the sake of the process, even without the outcome. That drives you from inside. This is sustainable. And if you really want to motivate people, you have to understand what drives them. Like Chris Voss said, the FBI negotiator, there's no such thing as logical, only what matters to people. And once you understand what matters to people, you can connect your message to that. And this is when you have a real impact. That's how you bridge that mindset gap. Otherwise, the message gets lost. Just because somebody needs something, it doesn't mean that they want it. And that's the biggest challenge for us as coaches and trainers, or even as parents. So how do you deliver the message in a way that it connects with them? How can you speak their language? That's the real question. So now you have a cognitive diverse, smart team. That's a good start. How do you know if they feel safe and motivated enough to innovate and collaborate? It sounds like a really simple question, but how do you answer it? How can you optimize something without measuring and visualizing it? That's the real question. It's very difficult. If you cannot do that, it's difficult, but it's way too easy to ignore it, at least for a while. Because it's almost like a leaking bucket. You know, you can learn how to fill up the bucket. You can get better at it, but would it make more sense to fix it so you're not losing that potential? And maybe it doesn't feel good, but that's how you can grow the most. Even if you think about psychological safety, the best way of building psychological safety is by not ruining it. Just like in the German language, the highest level of praise is when nobody criticizes you. We have to address the root cause. And then you become much more efficient. You can achieve more with the same amount of energy. If growth mindset is about running faster, then uncommon mindset is about significantly reducing your baggage. That's a pretty good deal. So if somebody, a team, scores high on psychological safety, then they are in the growth zone. If they have nothing, that's the apathy zone. If they have only psychological safety, it's comfortable. But if they have only motivation, then probably burn out. That's the anxiety zone. You can see that we mark the bottom and 25% of motivation and psychological safety. So they created 4 quadrants within the quadrants. So we have the family zone. This is what I refer to. It's really popular to say that we are a business, we are a family. No, it's not the same thing. A real business, a profitable business is psychologically safe, but also motivating. So if you look at the team, the average might be really good. They are in the growth zone. So they could tap themselves on the back, case closed. But like we discussed it, numbers can lie, especially averages. So if you look at, for example, the numbers, now we can see that something is not right. But we quantify it. Psychological safety, 64%, motivation, 66%. Not horrible, quite good. But we can also see the tension score, 73% and 65%. That shows how polarized the team is. And I'm not talking about creative tension, not at all. And I'll show you why. Because when we look at the individuals, you can see that the average is great. But if this is a team of people who need to work together on a daily basis towards a specific goal, that's not great. Some people feel rejected, demotivated, disengaged. Others are like fish in the water. And if you look at the research, even if you have only one outlier, it can affect performance by 30 or 40%. Obviously, the first question is, who are these people? It doesn't matter. First of all, we don't know. It's anonymous. Secondly, we have to find out why people feel like that so we can adjust the root cause. That's the goal. It doesn't matter whose fault something is. It is everybody's responsibility because it affects everyone. Personally, I don't think that there is an assessment that could tell you exactly what your problem is. Some people might promise it, but I don't think that's true. Only the participants know that. So we can break down psychological safety and motivational drivers into 4 subcategories each. That's 8 altogether. And when we visualize it, when we do the debrief, then we can discuss it. So how come some people feel really motivated, others feel demotivated? We don't know that. We have the data. They have the insights. And that's what we have to combine. Data on its own is not enough. Stories without data, not so much. When you combine both and you co-create a solution with the participants, everything changes. Engagement goes up because we don't pretend that we know the truth. Here's your 5 bullet points, just follow my instructions. Nobody likes that. So now we know the #1 ingredient of growth, how much you understand yourself and others. We face the 2 barriers, common sense and outdated solutions. And we learned about the 3 invisible forces. But how do they connect? What's the point? So we know that the highest level of growth happens when you have a cognitively diverse, psychologically safe, and motivating environment. That is the highest level of growth. That's why we measure all. So if they score high on all 3 of them, they are in stage 1. That's growth. This is where the breakthrough happens. Profitable, high-performing. Think about Netflix. When they started in '97, they had a clear idea. Yes, they had to pivot because renting out DVDs wasn't the best idea. But then they wanted the best of the best. They paid them more. They were willing to take risks, and they're doing really well. Stage 2 is time bomb. And it sounds nasty because it is. When you have a time bomb somewhere, if you find it, you can defuse it. If you don't, it can cause a lot of damage. But for long, you don't know that it's there. And a team is in stage 2 when they scored low on 1 of the 3 invisible forces. If they are missing cognitive diversity, then it gives them that kind of tunnel vision, a huge blind spot. If they are lacking motivation, then it leads to stagnation. Not much happens. And if they have only motivation or they are lacking psychological safety, then it can lead to anxiety. People burn out. Yes, you can still make a lot of money, but there's high staff turnover, and what's the cost of that? Typical example, Volkswagen, the Dieselgate. In 2010, they had a problem. They had to deliver the numbers. The whole reputation was based on precision, accuracy, transparency. But it turned out that they implemented more than 500,000 defeat devices in cars in the US, so they can pass the emission test. Then later on, they lied about it, they denied, they had to sack the CEO, and they were accused of corporate manslaughter. Everybody knew there was a problem. It was the lack of psychological safety. Nobody could speak up, or they just didn't want to. So they thought that they made some money, but they lost much more. Stage 3 is decline. This is when you have problems with 2 of the invisible forces. So if you have only motivation, it's like a rat race. Run, run, run until you collapse. If you have only psychological safety, then it leads to dissolution because there are no new ideas and nobody's motivated to get things done. And if you have only cognitive diversity, but nothing else, that leads to confusion, proper chaos. And again, size is not a guarantee. For example, in 1968, Kodak had more than 80% of the market. It was huge and comfortable. But when in 1975, digital camera was invented, they said, nah, our customers are loyal. They love our pictures. And the customers said, no, actually, we like digital stuff. They're cheaper and better quality. And then Fuji came. Kodak was still comfortable. There's no issue. Our customers are loyal. They would never buy Japanese. And the customers said, actually, yes, it's pretty good. So by the time they managed to wake up, they lost a lot of market share. And now they are getting into cryptocurrency. Stage 4, game over. It's kind of self-explanatory. This is when you have issues with all the 3 invisible forces. The prime example of that is Blockbuster. They were huge. And when in 2000, Netflix approached them, They just dismissed them. Little startup, don't annoy us. In 2004, they realized that that's a real competition. Now we have an issue. At that point, they had two options. They could have canceled the late fees, but that would have cost $200 million. Not a good idea. Option two, let's build a digital platform. Cost would have been the same. Outcome was the same. Dismissed. Indeed, they managed to fire the CEO because he was rocking the boat too much. Later on, they filed for bankruptcy and they had more than $1 billion in debt. And now they have one store somewhere in the US as a decoration. Size is not a guarantee for anything. The world is rapidly changing. If we cannot harness the power of cognitive diversity in a psychologically safe and motivating environment, technology on its own is not enough. So when you can visualize the results like this, people can make a much better decision, informed decision. Some people get offended by data, but that's not a good sign. So where is your team? Are they doing well? Are they in the growth zone? Stage one? Maybe, is it a time bomb? Maybe the rat race? Or they are heading over, game over. Which one is it? We can hope for the best or we can measure it. So we know exactly what's going on, so we can address it. That is the safest option. It might not be pleasant, it's not comfortable, but losing a company and a job can be much more painful. And that's our job as consultants and coaches. It has to be, the approach has to be data-driven. So we can show them that if you carry on like this, this is where it leads to. And then compared to that pain, the discomfort of doing something now is nothing. And that's human nature. We don't do anything until it hurts enough. And data makes it clear. So you remember this? How people dismiss this? That, yeah, probably the introverted people. No. Maybe they just don't feel motivated. Maybe they are not psychologically safe. Maybe something else is going on in their life. We don't know. We can have the data, but data without stories are powerless. But stories without data are just noise. But stories with data provide insights. They increase engagement, shape constructive behaviors, and fuel growth mindset, and also growth. But for that, we need to know what's wrong. If you solve the issue that is not the real problem, you're not going to get the results that you're hoping and paying for. We can step on the scale and then we can get offended, or if we don't like the number, we can go on a diet. That's the point. So this is the approach. Of course, the length and content can change, but the approach is the same. First, you measure it, then we visualize it. We can discuss it with the team because they are the only people who know what the problem is. But if you don't have the vocabulary and the frame of reference, then it's very difficult to talk about something you're not aware of. Then we can optimize it. We can co-create a solution, and then we can grow. There is no shortcut. You cannot skip the first two steps and expect complete results. So measure what matters, because guessing is not really an option. One of the main challenges that a lot of people turn into an intellectual hamster. Have you ever seen a hamster eating, when they put everything in the face, but they don't chew? A lot of people are like this. Let's read another book. Let's attend another course. But as soon as you have to implement the new ideas and you have to practice something new, it's pretty much guaranteed that it's going to be painful or at least uncomfortable. But you cannot fail at gathering information. There's always another book. There's always something else. And then I try it later on. And that's how we turn into an intellectual hamster. So that's why we want to focus on this. The different levels of DNI. The bottom is when you have nothing, no diversity. Level 2, different looks, similar thoughts. There's no cognitive diversity. Level 3 is when you have some, but it's inconsistent. And level 4 is the highest one, when you have psychologically safe, all the 3 invisible forces. Now, the issue is that a lot of clients believe that they are level 4. In reality, they are level 2. And it's not even their fault. They don't know about this. They have a lot of different looking people who think the same way. That's good for marketing. It's not good for strategy and creativity. That's the challenge with that. So this is the certification we have, for example. We do it 3 or 4 times a year. When people get a business in a box, they get their own online portal, assessment, training materials, and an incredible, awesome community that we have to share the knowledge. Because we have to be part of the solution. Talking about it is not enough. So going back to our journey, what makes a good life? Maybe it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's an important question. And the longest research was, I think, 75 years old, when they were following people. And they wanted to answer this question. They measured everything: finances, health, mental health, everything. And this was the result. The quality of your life is in direct proportion with the quality of your relationships with yourself and others. That was the secret of light, the longest research on happiness. That's why this is so important. It goes back to that. People skills are not optional. They are not soft. They're essential. But it's not based on assumptions. It's not based on common sense and good intention. It's something that we need to learn. And once we do, we get better results.